Well, let's read this wonderful story. It is on page 919 in your Pew Bible. It is Luke the 24th chapter if you're using your own Bible. We're going to start with verse 1. I'll give you a moment to get there. But on the first day of the week, at early dawn, they, meaning several women, went to the tomb, taking the spices which they had prepared. And they found the stone rolled away from the tomb. But when they went in, they did not find the body. While they were perplexed about this, behold, two men stood by them in dazzling apparel. And as they were frightened and bowed their faces to the ground, the men said to them, "Why do you seek the living among the dead? Remember how he told you while he was still in Galilee that the Son of Man must be delivered into the hands of sinful men and be crucified, and on the third day rise." And they remembered his words. And returning from the tomb, they told all this to the 11 and to all the rest. Now it was Mary Magdalene and Joanna and Mary, the mother of James, and the other women with them, who told this to the apostles. But these words seemed to them an idle tale, and they did not believe them. May the Lord add his blessing to the reading of his word. Well, as I was doing some sermon reading, I read about a website that is a collection of 6-word memoirs You might even think of them sort of like an epitaph, but written by the living, famous people, ordinary people, and they sum up their lives in 6 words. 6 words. Some of them are sad or poignant. One said, "I still make coffee for 2." Some of them are downright tragic. Remember how Hemingway was challenged to write a story in 6 words? Tragic like that. His story said, "For sale, baby shoes, never worn." But I like comedian Stephen Colbert's, "Well, I thought it was funny." What 6 words would you use to sum up your life? I got to thinking about it. It's hard, 6 words. But I came down to some very familiar ones. Was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. Either one works. What if we boiled our faith down to 6 words? There's so many words or terms that we use to describe our faith, but the 6 words that the angels told those women at the tomb, they get right down to it. Jesus is risen from the dead. Jesus is risen from the dead. Those words they carried back to those 11 and more believers. Those words have been carried by believers ever since. They're still being carried. They are the words on which all of our other words rest. Jesus is risen from the dead. You know, they're the words the martyrs sang as they were being burned at the stake. They were the words that Dietrich Bonhoeffer taught in his secret seminary as they struggled against Nazi Germany. They're the words that Oscar Romero was celebrating as he prepared to serve communion, but was gunned down in El Salvador. They're the words which gave Martin Luther King Jr. his courage to battle against racism in our country. They're the words that inspired Desmond Tutu's work for human rights in Africa. Jesus is risen from the dead. Some today may wonder, are they true? There may be those sitting here who wonder, are those 6 words true? The Apostle Paul wrote that if they're not, then believers are most to be pitied. If they're not, countless lives have been given for the truth of them over the centuries. If they're not, then let's face it, all human life on this planet is doomed to a short, mostly painful, meaningless existence. Now somebody may say, well, life is painful. And no one can prove the truth of those words, Susan. But on the other hand, there is so much evidence to support the truth of them. Above all, that evidence of all those millions and millions who across the centuries have laid down their life rather than denounce it, rather than take it back. They died on those 6 words. Jesus is risen from the dead. And no sane person would die for a lie. Think about it. These are the 6 words that changed civilization. You know, earliest humans, they believed in God or gods, and those gods were either apathetic or they had to be appeased. So they practiced all sorts of craziness and human sacrifice. But Christianity told them of a God who would sacrifice himself, who would become one of us, and love us in order to save us. And can you imagine how good a news this was to those in that time. Those 6 words, they're game changers. They were, and they still are. It was a message that was heavily backed by credible evidence of some 500 and more people who saw the risen Christ. And then once they saw him, they couldn't hold back. They took news of it everywhere, across the continents. They faced all manner of violence because they had to tell people about this God who had such a love, whose life couldn't be killed. Well, this was just too good to be true. It rang absolutely true. And then there was the teaching that changed everything. Well, it was just true. It was true that it was better if you treated others the way you wish to be treated. It was so much better if you forgave as you wish to be forgiven. It was so much better if you loved your enemies as you loved yourself. And yes, loving enemies, that was a crazy thought in that time. But these words, they had the power to heal and restore. Now, on the other hand, it became clear that if you didn't believe in these words, if you denied them, if you discredited them, well, then the evil you might do was so much easier. Yet those 6 words were a liberating message for all of them, those who held them as true. And whether you were male or female, whether you were Jew or Gentile, whether you were an adult or a child, whether you were an awful sinner or perhaps a saint, Christ was for you. He died for you. He rose for you. His resurrection life was yours for the taking. Your life mattered. It had purpose, no matter who you were. And today, it's kind of strange, but even this seat of great economic power in the world, this place we call the New York Stock Exchange, do you know all of its activity comes to a halt on Good Friday? On Good Friday, no activity in remembrance of a Galilean peasant who died to give his life to save the world and then rose and saved it. What about the power of the love of those who believed in those 6 words? Jesus is risen from the dead. Out of their absolute conviction that those 6 words were true, and out of the resulting love for Christ that they held in their hearts and took into the world, they ran to tragedies throughout history. They ran in response to all the illness and death of the bubonic plague, and so many other instances, ran to minister, to love, to do what they could rather than saving themselves. This was extraordinary. No one had ever seen anything like that before. And that faith and that love continued to lead them to risk all, many losing their lives, to bring those 6 words to the deepest, darkest, scariest places on the planet. Their stories are told in the Bible. Hebrews 11 lists off so many who in their love took this message to places of death. And it is still being taken. It is still a message that causes people to risk everything to take it. What about the countless lives that have been transformed by those 6 words? Oh yes, Mary Magdalene, the disciples, ordinary people, great sinners. They became humble leaders. They became world changers. Some became martyrs. Some are people we know. Look around you. Some are right here. Thursday at our Maundy Thursday service, people shared how those 6 words, believing in that one, changed everything about their life. How their life was a life because of those 6 words. Think about the people who have so clearly shown you Jesus Christ. The way they treat people, the way they live, the way they give, the way they sacrifice. There's no argument against that. You simply see Jesus. Jesus is risen from the dead. The evidence is everywhere if we choose to see it. And those words do change everything. That's why they've always made those who would control and oppress others so afraid of them. Because when people really believe them, they change the world as they live by them. And no power has ever been able to stop them. So in 2019, in 2020, how will these words change the world? How will they change Bassett, Virginia? What will they say to a depressed area? Its economy, its poverty, its opioid crisis. How will those words change Pocahontas Bassett Baptist Church? Will they change you if they haven't already? You know, Easter is about leaving our tombs behind. So many tombs of fear, tombs of failure, tombs of shame and sorrow, tombs of anger, tombs of regret, tombs of hurt, of crushed hopes and dreams. Remember how Lazarus left his tomb when Jesus called him? So can you. Lazarus' home today in Bethany is called the House of Laughter. And that laughter is about the defeat of death. Those 6 words proclaim the best joke ever. That death is now dead. It's no longer got the last word because Jesus is risen from the dead. His resurrection can be yours. Starting now. Starting today. Or maybe you heard what the angels said. Are you still looking for life among the dead? Doing your own thing? Living for any pleasure you can find? Searching for that elusive thing called peace? Maybe risking another iffy relationship, hoping to find life in it for once? Listen. The 6 words are for you. They're the keys to your prison cell. Jesus is risen from the dead. I give you one last word. Do you struggle with faith in that? You'll never come up with the faith in it yourself. You'll never come up with the belief in it yourself. Ephesians 2:8-9 says this, "For by grace are you saved through faith, and that faith is not of yourself. It's the free gift of God. Free gift of God. Not as a result of works, not as a result of anything we can conjure up in ourselves. Or else, Paul wrote, we would boast about it. Grace saves us. If you've never been able to find faith in those words, would you ask God for them? Would you ask God for the faith? I really think many people don't come to faith not because it's so hard to believe, because they could receive the faith from God, but because deep down they know it will change everything. It will change everything in their life. So where are you today? Am I telling an idle tale? Or will you believe it? Jesus is risen from the dead. I stand here for no other reason than that. I never intended to even be here, but the Lord brought me on this journey. And now I'm so grateful to be able to have this avenue to proclaim every week and even every day that hopeful message of all hope. Jesus is risen from the dead. Will it be yours today? Would you pray with me, please? Oh, Lord, help us. Help us in this moment to know what we really believe about you. Help us that if we merely possess a head knowledge of you, that we're really no better off than our spiritual enemy, the devil. Because your word says, oh yes, he believes, he knows you are, and he shudders. He has no life in you, but he knows that you are. Lord, save us from that, from thinking that that is a faith. You call us into relationship. You call us into a journey with you that will give us life. You offer us your spirit, your resurrection, your power. You offer us you. Lord, if anyone this morning is sitting here not knowing you, help them to throw all concern for what anyone else might think aside. Help them to come take your hand this morning in this time of invitation. May your will be done this day. We pray in your wonderful name. Amen.